morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today, and you all are in for a treat because Niall and I are at the desk together for 3 days straight.
3 whole days. What could be better, Amber? I'm looking forward to it.
Me too.
So let's get started. California Governor Gavin Newsom and Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass are not happy with the financial cost of deploying troops to the Golden State.
Here is Congressman Pete Aguilar grilling Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth on the matter yesterday.
What is the estimated cost of the deployment for the Guard and the Marines to LA, and where's this funding coming from? Will it be coming from quality of life programs that affect our service members or our families? If you want to wait till I finish.
Before I hand it to
such as updates, housing and barracks.
Before I hand it to Bryn, the insinuation that we're pulling money from housing and barracks in order to fund this is disingenuous and incorrect.
I'm just asking.
Bryn can give you the numbers. Absolutely.
So the current estimated cost is $134 million, which is largely just TDY costs, travel, housing, food, etc.
Bass wrote on X, just an absolutely shameful use of taxpayer dollars that could be used to actually help people. Despicable. Newsom chimed in, writing $134 million that should be going to LA's fire recovery. Shameful.
Democrat Senator John Fetterman is not happy with his party's response to the riots, writing on X, unapologetically stand for free speech, peaceful demonstrations, and immigration, but this is not that. This is anarchy and true chaos. My party loses the moral high ground when we refuse to condemn setting cars on fire, destroying buildings, and assaulting law enforcement.
The LAPD says it has arrested at least 378 people and that law enforcement has started making, quote, mass arrests. There is also a curfew in place in Los Angeles from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. and that covers an area of around 1 square mile. Lots to talk about here, Amber. I would first of all push back against John Fetterman. Nothing unusual with that. I'm often pushing back against John Fetterman. But the idea that Democrats haven't condemned that, I mean, I watched Karen Bass's press conference a day or so ago. She was very clear about the criticism and the condemnation of people breaking the law and then going on to the critiques of President Trump's conduct, which I would largely share. But tell me, what do you think of all this?
Well, I found some of the early responses from Democrats to be quite troubling because they didn't condemn violence for violence sake because violence is bad, but because they said it played into the hands of the Trump administration. And I think it's not a good idea to try to frame violence being objectionable only because it hurts your political goals and not because it's objectively bad.
Well, I would not really agree with that because I think the point is that they are looking for a point of traction with people who might be protesting and feeling riled up and all that. An argument to make against violence is that it is counterproductive. I don't think that is a morally objectionable argument to make. I think one often sees that about political violence where you say, well, this is actually counterproductive to your cause. That is simply a point of argument along with the idea that disorder, is wrong and itself and shouldn't be tolerated.
Doesn't that speak poorly of their base, though, that they have to have this argument that, well, don't do this, guys, because it's hurting your political goals, not because you shouldn't be doing violence because violence is bad? Like, does their base not agree with the idea that violence is bad on its face? And what does that say about them?
So I see where you're coming from on that, but I would argue that it is, what we're talking about is a very small group of people now who are involved in actual acts of violence. Now, where I think Democrats struggle even in making that argument is the people who are throwing Molotov cocktails are not social democrats by and large. They're either vandals or people who are, anarchists, revolutionary socialists, whatever. So I actually think that although the effort is to get traction with the argument that it's counterproductive, people who are anarchists, for example, aren't going to listen to anything Democrats say because anarchists have a different view of the whole society and actually wish to inflame matters further. So in that sense, I think it is a difficult situation for Democrats because they are being held in a sense responsible, or Trump is seeking to hold them responsible for the actions of people over whom they have no control.
We should probably get into some of these arguments against the Trump administration sending in the National Guard as well as now members of the Marines. Some have focused on the cost of doing so, which I find a bit silly. I mean, there wouldn't be the requirement to send troops in if people weren't rioting and if the local police were capable of handling the situation, which according to all the videos that came out over the weekend, they weren't capable of doing. And although obviously $134 million is a lot of money, the idea that this would be a significant portion of fire recovery or Medicaid programs or SNAP programs is a little out of pocket. The other argument they've made is that Trump doesn't have the authority to do so, which is obviously not correct. Even Biden's former Pentagon spokesperson said in a recent television hit that he absolutely has the legal authority to do this. This is part of the president's purview. Pete Hegseth gave a similar answer during his congressional testimony yesterday, but wanted to get your reaction, Niall, to some of the pushback on Trump for sending in the troops.
So a few things. Firstly, in relation to authority, I think that is one of the weaker Democratic arguments. My reading of the law is that he does have authority. There is an asterisk to that in the sense of the authority is supposed to go through the governor. Now, it is not, I would say, crystal clear from my reading of the statute in question whether that means you have to have the governor's permission or whether the governor should simply accede to presidential demands. But the argument is that if if federal law cannot be executed, a president does have the right to do that. Where I would disagree with the views that you have put forward, Amber, is in relation to the idea that the local police don't have the capacity to take care of it. The fact that people break the law does not mean that the rule of law has entirely broken down, and we see occasionally unrest or just crime, and that's what the police forces are there for. I think you get into a very dangerous situation if you say anytime there is any kind of protest that justifies sending in the National Guard or sending in the Marines, and you risk in doing that inflaming a situation further. And we see just in the past 48 hours or so, these protests spreading from Los Angeles primarily and some other places in California across the nation. That to me, it gets to the heart of this issue, which is not about the legality of Trump doing what he did, but the efficacy of it, if the goal is in fact to restore peace and order. I'm not personally persuaded that is his goal, because I think he sees political dividend in being as polarizing as possible. And just one thing on him garbing himself as the president of law and order, and we are not going to tolerate crime and so forth. Among the people he pardoned in relation to January the 6th, Devlin Thompson, who hit a police officer with a metal baton, Robert Palmer, who attacked police with a fire extinguisher, a wooden plank and a pole. Those people were worthy of pardons in Trump's mind. That does not suggest to me a president who really cares about law and order. Instead, he cares about hitting his enemies and rewarding his friends.
Well, local police did say that they did not feel that the situation was properly contained, despite the statements made by Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass early on when the cars started being set on fire, when ICE agents, who are federal officers, were being barricaded in buildings by these rioters, right? So they were actually impeding federal law enforcement efforts in order to round up illegal immigrants.
Who are you saying was impeding it, sorry?
The rioters.
Okay, sorry,
yeah.
I thought you were saying.
Yeah, this all started because ICE had a warrant that they were executing to arrest criminal illegal aliens, including child rapists, fraudsters, domestic abusers. There was a false claim from a local Democratic official that they were raiding a Home Depot and trying to pick up day laborers, which ended up not being true. So these rioters showed up and they actually tried to block ICE from leaving the building with these criminal illegals, and that's what spurred the entire riot that ended up happening. And I would venture to guess that based on some of the tactics that they always intended for this to be a nationwide protest. Else why would the SIU president be there trying to get arrested by helping these rioters block these things? This was a very...
It was the California SEIU president, so
Right.
He was in his home state then.
Yes, but I think that they were trying to get some high-profile person arrested, just based on what we know about groups like Antifa, Black Bloc, BLM. They often do this where they try to get a high-profile arrest in these protests in order to spur nationwide action. This has been their playbook for the past 15 years.
I think we're almost out of time, I've been told, but I can't let the idea that Antifa and the SEIU are somehow comparable organizations. I mean, one is self-evidently a radical leftist organization and one's a very well-established labor union.
Oh, unfortunately, we're out of time. Does Elon Musk regret lashing out at President Trump? That's next. Are the tides turning? Is making up in the future? Well, it seems that Elon Musk has been doing some self-reflection. He says that he's remorseful of some of his ex-posts about President Trump. He writes, "I regret some of my posts about President Trump last week. They went too far."
It's the latest sign of a possible reconciliation between the two men. It's been almost a week since Trump and Musk traded barbs, and pretty heated barbs at that, about each other. The fall-off capped off escalating qualms that Musk had expressed about Trump's sweeping tax and spending package, dubbed the Big Beautiful Bill.
Musk did not specify which of the posts that he was referencing, but the billionaire did delete some of them about Trump, including one saying the president is included in the Epstein files.
A political commentary page, Republicans Against Trump. It seems a rather mild way of describing it in our script. But anyway, Republicans Against Trump say, "So, did you lie when you said Trump was in the Epstein files? Or do you just regret saying it out loud and getting threatened?" What do you think of Republicans Against Trump's argument?
Oh,
Amber?
well, I don't know how seriously we should take them. But look, I do think this is an interesting development in the Elon Musk, Donald Trump seemingly feud. And I actually have to give a lot of credit to Trump here, because typically when these types of blowups happen, when people leave the administration on bad terms, he is quick to go to the personal attacks, balls to the wall, all-out attacks. He did not do that in this case. He was pretty conciliatory towards Elon Musk, would not say anything overtly negative about him, said that it was unfortunate that he was leaving the way that he did, that he didn't appreciate some of the posts. But according to sources we've talked to in and around the White House, Trump was very clear that he has a lot of respect for Elon Musk, that the two are actually really great friends, and he personally directed members of the administration, particularly Vice President J.D. Vance, to not go on offense against Elon, to show him some deference and provide him some grace amid a slurry of really nasty posts about Trump.
So it's no big surprise to anyone who watches this show regularly that I'm not a big Elon Musk fan. I do think he's at least showing some signs of some capacity for perhaps self-reflection there. I also think he's obviously wanting to make up with Trump after, the Epstein files in particular was a pretty inflammatory charge to throw around. Now, when you say about Trump being conciliatory, in one sense, I think that is true in the kinds of comments that he has made to the press when he has been asked about them. But there was the separate debate about whether Musk's companies could somehow lose federal contracts. And one of my main critiques of Musk is that I think he tends to wrap up self-interest in a rather vainglorious or self-glorifying rhetoric about how he's all caring about bigger things, or in this case that he has thought about it and he decides he wants to make up with Trump. I assume that Musk is actually looking after his business interests and realized that he went too far from that perspective.
I think maybe he realized that he's not going to have any friends on the other side of the aisle if he doesn't stay friendly with Republicans. He sort of threatened the idea of pooling all of his money from the Republican midterm electoral efforts and potentially giving that to Democrats instead. But let's be honest, which members of the Democratic Party are going to be happy to accept Elon Musk's help at this point? He's kind of on an island. So I do think that that plays into it. I'm sure that the threatening of the government contracts does as well. And there's still this sort of lingering debate over whether or not he was being honest about not liking the EV tax credits being removed through the big, beautiful bill. He has said publicly that he's fine with the tax credits being removed, but then also said really all of the subsidies for various kinds of energy should be removed. And then Speaker Johnson's office, sources close to them have said repeatedly that he directly asked the Speaker to keep those in the bill. So there's a lot of debate over how he actually feels about that.
No, absolutely. And there's also, as part of that debate, the idea that, well, I wouldn't ask for incentives for my companies, but it's kind of unfair that other people are getting them, like the implication.
It kind of gives the game away.
It does, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do think that in relation to them both at times showing some conciliatory attitudes toward each other, I just read that as there being a recognition that each one is in a position to hurt the other if it really ended up in a sort of all-out war between them. Because while Trump could hurt Musk in terms of business sense and so forth, I do think that Musk's megaphone, not just in terms of the ownership of X, but also his kind of pretty clear channel to the online, right, has some capacity to muddy up Trump. There was a poll within the past 24 hours suggesting that Musk had lost popularity among Republicans in the wake of all this, which doesn't surprise me very much. I mean, I think that most Republicans' loyalty is to Trump, not to Elon Musk. But it's interesting.
Well, that's right. I mean, I think in that sense, Elon needs Trump more than Trump needs Elon because, I mean, we saw what happened when Elon waded into the Wisconsin Supreme Court election. It obviously didn't work out well. It's really Trump that has more political sway than Elon at this point, even with, I think, the online right. And so if he wants some place where he can dump money to try to get certain people elected that he thinks are going to be useful to him, he needs Trump to back that effort.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, my view in terms of the online right is that Musk does have the propensity sometimes to throw these sort of rhetorical bombs at people. And if he really turned that full force on Trump, I don't think it would be like, oh, Trump's popularity is suddenly halved. But I do think that there are particularly sort of younger men, populist men, who revere Musk and whose response to that might be negative.
Yeah, I mean, outside of the sort of threats that each side are making, I do think it's been clear that their friendship ran a lot deeper than a lot of people, particularly the media, realized. There was always a lot of talk about this sort of simmering feud from the beginning of the administration. But the reason that Musk was able to stay as long as he was and sort of have that protection was because of Trump. And because of his protection of Elon Musk. And it was actually other cabinet members that really didn't like him.
I was going to say, it certainly wasn't Musk's popularity with the rest of the cabinet that was protecting him. Moving on, Tulsi Gabbard is taking some heat after posting an ominous video warning of a potential nuclear war. We'll get into that next. Stay with us.
A single nuclear weapon today could kill millions in just minutes. Just one of these nuclear bombs would vaporize everything at its core: people, buildings, life itself.
That was Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, remembering the horrors caused in Hiroshima and Nagasaki and warning the world of a potential nuclear war.
In a video posted on social media, Gabbard slams political elites and warmongers for bringing the world closer to the brink of nuclear annihilation. Let's take a look.
Because as we stand here today, closer to the brink of nuclear annihilation than ever before, political elite and warmongers are carelessly fomenting fear and tensions between nuclear powers. Perhaps it's because they are confident that they will have access to nuclear shelters for themselves and for their families that regular people won't have access to.
People on both sides of the aisle pushed back on Gabbard's video. Josh Hammer, host of The Josh Hammer Show, wrote on X, "The United States should never ever apologize for President Truman's correct decision to bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki to finally end the war in the Pacific." Jesse Kelly, host of The Jesse Kelly Show, wrote on X, "3 things. 1, I agree with dropping the bombs. 2, not agreeing with dropping bombs on civilians is a perfectly reasonable take. Many felt the same way at the time. World War II isn't a religion. 3, she's talking about preventing a future nuclear war and the cost of it."
The editor-in-chief of the left-wing Midas Touch, Ron Filipkowski, also chimed in. DNI Tulsi Gabbard repeats Putin's talking points today, releasing an unhinged video where she claims that political elites want a nuclear war with Russia because they have sophisticated bomb shelters that will help them survive it. Where to begin with this, Amber?
It's interesting. Pushback from both sides, as we mentioned. Look, I think it's possible to understand the U.S.'s decision-making in dropping the nuclear bomb and trying to end the war and perhaps prevent significant American casualties, and also recognize that it is still a very dark day in world history, that it had massive civilian casualties. And I think if she would have ended the video by saying, "and that's why we can never let Iran have a nuclear weapon,"
right,
maybe it would have been received better. But I just don't find these two views mutually exclusive.
Well, so first of all, I agree with you about her foregrounding Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I think it is, yes, I understand the arguments, which was that even with the massive death toll from those, the dropping of the atomic bombs, that there would have been a greater death toll had you had to fight on with a land war in the Pacific. But I do think that the crossing of the atomic bomb Rubicon in that respect, and the killing of an estimated 210,000 people at the time, and all the people who have died from radiation exposure since, I think that was, you used the word bleak day or dark day, and I think that's right. So credit to her for saying that. Now, it's interesting whether you interpret it as being about Iran. I interpret it as, I think some people on the left are doing, as being about Russia and Ukraine, because obviously Tulsi Gabbard is very well known for being, let me try to put this neutrally, very skeptical of support for Ukraine, and I think that she therefore gets criticism for being overly sympathetic to Russia. And so when she starts talking about elites and their nuclear shelters and people plotting essentially to bring the world to the brink or into a nuclear war, I took her to mean people who are vigorous supporters of Ukraine.
I also read it, though, in relation to Iran, because we also have people who have been quite reticent for the Trump administration to negotiate directly with Iran, to leave Israel out of some of those discussions, to try to spur the U.S. to side with Israel in an attack on Iran, which we talked about last week with the Mark Levin debate. He wasn't happy about what we said on the show.
He wasn't happy with you.
No, he
mind liberal criticism, but he wasn't happy with you.
No, he wasn't thrilled, but that's okay. I don't mind. But yeah, I think it could be. It's probably about both things. I think it's generally about this sort of split in the Republican Party and even in the Democrats, right, where you have these sort of non-interventionist wings of both parties, and then you have the neocons and neoliberals in the middle who have been, over the past 20 years, very happy to get themselves into forever wars that don't have a seeming goal at the end, because there's always the the underlying protection of, well, the U.S. is the greatest nuclear power in the world. And so I think she's hinting at some of those tensions among the American elites in their decision to send people to war, to want to spur on conflict, as opposed to just like Putin propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the difficulties with the video is that what specifically she means is open to interpretation.
It's a little vague.
Yeah, I mean, she, of course, expresses regret or sadness about what happened with the dropping of the atomic bombs, but beyond that, is she having a go at the John Bolton type figures who are your classic neocons and let's bomb everywhere, or is she having a go at the people who are supportive of Ukraine? One of the things that frustrates me, if it's the Ukraine side of it, is that I don't think the anti-interventionist side in that respect really grapples fully with the consequences of Russia winning, of a Russia invasion of another sovereign country prevailing. And so I think that there is sometimes just a sort of willful ignoring of the consequences of that. Yes, you can make the arguments that she makes about NATO expansionism and all of those things, but like there is the bottom line question about, do we just allow Russia to invade neighboring countries and do nothing about it?
Yeah, and I think, to be fair, you know, the Trump administration has made pretty clear that they want some kind of negotiation, ultimate peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia, but they also don't want Russia to just like run roughshod over the whole process. And Trump had that tweet recently where he talked about his phone call with Putin, where he felt like he was not living up to his end of the deal, that they weren't really anywhere closer to reaching a peace agreement because Putin was being so obstinate. So actually, I think his posture on this has been pretty spot on.
Fair enough. We'll agree to mildly disagree.
Up next, veteran ABC News correspondent Terry Moran has been fired days after his suspension for lashing out at President Trump and Stephen Miller on X. Terry Moran is out at ABC News. The veteran journalist quickly finding out the repercussions of criticizing President Trump and top White House aide Stephen Miller. A spokesperson for the network making it clear it was all about the social media rant, telling The Hill Tuesday, quote, "We are at the end of our agreement with Terry Moran based on his recent post, which was a clear violation of ABC News policies. We made the decision not to renew."
The words that got Moran fired in a now deleted post on X included this: "Miller is a man who is richly endowed with the capacity for hatred. He's a world-class hater." Moran went on to attack the president, saying in part, "Trump is a world-class hater. But his hatred is only a means to an end, and that end is his own glorification.
Now, his ouster is cause for celebration on X. Conservative firebrand Charlie Kirk weighing in, posting in part, Terry Moran is a clear example of the radical media bias Americans have suffered for decades. White House Director of Communications Stephen Chung chiming in as well with the short message of talk blank, get hit. And Fox News host Howard Kurtz saying in part, Terry Moran revealed his own hatred and bile towards them, making his firing inevitable. ABC did the only thing it could do in dumping him, given the damage to the network's credibility.
The firing comes just 6 weeks after Moran interviewed Trump, where he pressed the president over Kilmar Abrego Garcia. That irritated Trump and made the now viral moment when the president suggested to Moran, "I've never heard of you," and that he was given a big break with the sit-down interview. Well, I'm not going to defend the now infamous deleted tweet. I mean, that seems self-evidently indefensible. I think that ABC News did the right thing by letting him go. I was sad about the whole episode because I think Terry Moran has been a very good journalist over the years, and I think that obviously sort of besmirched his own reputation. I actually think, I know we often criticize the mainstream media here, I think ABC News is a very good organization to the extent that I ever watch evening newscasts. I watch the David Muir one on ABC, which I think is the best of the three major networks. And I think that part of to be clear about the actual tweet that got Moran fired, let go, or whatever term you want to use, it's not the fact that someone criticizes Stephen Miller. People like myself, who are in a more opinion-y kind of role, can criticize Stephen Miller if we wish. People in all sorts of other roles can criticize Stephen Miller or anyone else. The point is that Terry Moran is not in an opinion role. He is ostensibly a straight reporter, so it completely undercuts that idea. And then, even if you were more opinion-y, some of the personalized nature, we read some of what he said about Miller, but the part that I found most indefensible was this thing. You can see this just by looking at him, looking at Stephen Miller. You see his hatreds are his spiritual nourishment.
Yeah, he eats hate, I think
he
said.
Hate. Like, that sort of, I mean, first of all, I just think about saying it about anyone. You can tell what this person's personality by looking at them is just a dumb thing to say, but it was very, very personalized.
Yeah, it was a very nasty tweet. There was nothing useful from it. It was not a critique of his policy or the things he's doing as a member of the administration, but was very, very personal, and there was no reason for it. And it seemed like maybe a mask-off moment for Terry Moran. ABC definitely did the right thing. I have a theory, and tell me what you think about this. So in the statement, ABC was very careful to say that they were at the end of a contract with Terry Moran, and so they decided not to renew the contract. I kind of wonder, maybe the negotiations weren't going super well, and Terry Moran already knew that he was on the way out, and he decided, all right, I'm going to go out with a bang. I'm going to tell you what I really think about Stephen Miller, and ABC's going to do what they will, but I'm probably not going to be around anyway.
So I, like you, was very struck with this idea that he was right at the end of his contract.
It seemed like convenient timing, right?
Right. So, I mean, somewhere I read that his contract expires on Friday. That, given that he's been with ABC for 28 years, to send that tweet approximately a week before your contract is up, that seems curious timing, to say the very least. Now, I don't know what is in his head, or obviously I can't mind read him, but it is curious that timing is what it is.
Yeah, I agree. And then shortly after getting that Trump interview too, like, you would normally think that someone who has this big White House sit down is, of course, going to be renewed. He's been with the network forever, and yet he decides to go out in this sort of spectacular fashion. The whole situation is very, very strange. And I do appreciate, though, that in the statement, ABC directly called out the social media post, because a lot of times when these media firings happen, it's a very sort of cushy PR statement of, we loved working with Terry, and
we wish him all the best.
We wish him well. We wish him well, but our time together is up. But no, they specifically said this post was a clear violation of ABC News policies, and of course had previously suspended him on Sunday after the tweet went out. So I appreciate that they were willing to call it for what it was and not try to sort of paper over or whitewash what his conduct was.
No, and I have talked on here before about instances where I think media organizations, or specifically their corporate owners, have kind of bended the knee to Trump in a way that I thought was unjustified. That's not what I think here. I don't see any way that ABC could have justified that tweet or made light of it. They had to do what they did. The contract timing is certainly curious. Obviously, from my perspective, none of this is to defend Stephen Miller, who I think often tweets in extremely hyperbolic fashion. I mean, he's constantly referring to judicial coups anytime judges rule against the Trump administration. He has referred a number of times to communist judges, which is a charge that I find absurd. So my point is really there are lots of legitimate grounds in which one can differ with or disagree with Stephen Miller. But if you're a purportedly straight news reporter on a major news network, and remember, the whole branding of those major news networks is that they are impartial. You can't be tweeting those sort of things and expecting to keep your job.
Well, I think Terry Moran perhaps will maybe take the role of a lot of other recently departed mainstream news anchors, where they're starting their own Substacks or starting their own shows. Maybe he wanted to go independent.
Well, if that's the case, right? It is a publicity raising.
Maybe so.
Raising.
He's going to get a lot of Substack subscribers if he starts it now from all of his old fans at ABC News.
He is. Maybe this is the time that he should really move into that area.
Yeah, he can pull a Jen Rubin. Why not?
Anyway, Republicans are taking aim at one of their own. Why Senator Josh Hawley is in the crosshairs. That's coming up.
It's a cause championed by fry cooks and fast food workers and now making waves in the halls of Congress, the federal hourly minimum wage.
Republican Senator Josh Hawley getting some backlash from his side of the aisle after teaming up with Democrats to introduce a bill that would more than double it, taking the minimum hourly wage from $7.25 all the way up to $15 by next year. The bill would also include annual increases to match inflation in the future. If it passes, it would be the first hike in nearly 20 years. Hawley told The Hill in a statement that wages have flatlined and that the federal minimum had failed to keep up with the economic reality.
Hawley has taken quite a bit of heat for the proposal. Reporter from the Post-Millennial Sarah Higdon responded to Hawley on X. She says, "I thought Republicans knew that raising the minimum wage only hurts mom and pop shops. a loss of jobs as companies decide it's cheaper to automate, and just makes more people poor as it causes the cost of living to rise, where the value of $15 an hour becomes no different than $7. And our very own Robbie Suave putting his 2 cents in, saying, quote, Josh Hawley is the biggest rhino of them all, but because he never crosses Trump in any apparent way, he gets a pass. Meanwhile, MAGA supporters are currently attacking Rand and Massey, who have immaculately conservative voting records because they dare to vote against the deficit-increasing catastrophe that is the big, beautiful bill.
It should be noted that 42 of the 50 states have a minimum wage higher than the federal standard, including nearly a dozen that have a wage higher than Hawley's proposal of $15 per hour. Hawley's home state of Missouri is also set to increase its minimum hourly wage to that same level starting next year. Basically, my stance on this, Amber, is that I don't care where good ideas arise from. I have talked several times here about the federal minimum wage and how I think it should be higher. It has been stuck at that level since 2009. I think that even though, you know, Josh Hawley is obviously I think a very conservative guy, I respectfully disagree with our friend Mr. Suave and his statement that he's a rhino. You know, good for him. He's joined, I think, by Senator Pete Welch, pretty liberal senator from Vermont, in this legislation, and good for them.
Yeah, I should note that Robbie actually called them MAGA sycophants, not supporters. So
yes.
It was a little harsher than I read. But
softening his attack.
I didn't mean to. But yes, it was sycophants. But I am not reflexively opposed to raising the minimum wage. I mean, when I first entered the workforce as a high schooler, being a lifeguard, I was making $7.25 an hour in my first job. We're obviously in a much different economy now.
Sure.
I think it's reasonable, even if you believe that most minimum wage jobs should be for entry-level, low-skilled workers, particularly people who are part-time workers or high schoolers or college students who are trying to get their first job. It's clear that I think $7.25 is too low. I would probably split the baby and maybe put it at somewhere to $10 to $12, or maybe you increase it over time as opposed to going right to the $15 an hour. I do think there are legitimate concerns about job losses for small businesses that maybe can't afford to bear that burden so quickly. And I think that the AI automation point is a good one too, right? You see a lot of fast food restaurants cutting down on cashiers, instead having those automated ordering screens. I've heard from a lot of people that low entry level, like low skill jobs in their industry are now being taken over by AI, and so it's hard for people to get experience in those low level roles if they don't exist or they're going to robots. Those kind of things. So there are real economic concerns to be balanced here, and so any increase, I hope, would be balanced with those issues.
There may be concerns which we can come to in a second, but I also think that there is a real issue with wage stagnation in this country, and there has been historically. And I was looking at some of the details on that this morning. So even the American Enterprise Institute, which is, you know, pretty right-leaning, found that in terms of inflation-adjusted hourly rates, between 1975 and 2020, the average rate for what are called unsupervisory workers rose by 18 cents in, what is that, 45 years. So that is much, much slower than had been the case, for example, in the decades immediately after the Second World War, which created the American middle class and where there were a lot more of those wages rising. Now, in terms of the employment question, there is conflicting research on that. There's a UC Berkeley study that found that, in fact, it had very minimal effects on employment, and what happened was that because all employers are obligated, obviously by the nature of the law, to raise wages, there's a moderate increase in prices to consumers, and you know, this Berkeley study was suggesting that concerns about employment are overstated. In terms of AI, I mean, it's an interesting point you raise. I just wonder, like, if AI is taking over some of those low-skill jobs, those jobs will kind of be vaporized regardless of what the prevailing wage for them is, though.
Yeah, potentially, but I do think if they're more expensive, if it's more expensive to hire a human, even if you're a business that values having actual persons in those roles, you might be quicker to switch over to AI if you have to pay
the
an actual
incentives would be
exactly
greater. Yeah,
exactly.
Okay.
The average minimum wage around the country, I believe, is $10.48, which is how I kind of landed on that $10 to $12 range. I think that's probably a little bit more reasonable than $15 an hour. But I do find the attacks on Josh Hawley from the right to be very reminiscent of sort of the old, very fiscally conservative wing of the party, the Tea Party, for example. And I think you'll probably see some other Republicans start to jump on this trend as the party embraces more fiscally liberal policies, which we've seen with Trump rejecting, major cuts to entitlement programs and wanting to keep Social Security as it is and all of those issues, where he's made pretty clear, look, part of my coalition, my base, is working class Americans who broke through the blue wall in 2016 to elect me, and I'm not going to abandon them by adopting this very Milton Friedman-esque version of economics that maybe doesn't serve their best interests.
And to that exact point, it's worth noting that Hawley himself is, though very socially conservative, definitely on that more whatever you would call worker-friendly kind of end of
He's
the
very
Republican
concerned
Party.
about monopolies.
Right.
He's very pro-union.
Right.
I mean, a lot of people accuse him of being the Elizabeth Warren of the right.
Right, yeah, because he actually is concerned about labor protections and things
Exactly.
like that, which is, I think, makes political sense for him, and obviously it is part of this increasing political realignment that we're seeing.
Yeah, and it's something that makes sense in Missouri, by the way, because you have Missourians voting for Josh Hawley and Donald Trump, but also for increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour and for paid leave.
Yeah, and then there's a whole story as well about the population being more in favor of left-wing economic policies than cultural policies. In any event, law enforcement turns on media covering the LA riots. We have plenty to say on that coming up next.
After hours of standing off, this situation has now rapidly deteriorated. The LAPD moving in on horseback, firing rubber bullets at protesters, moving them on through the heart of LA. Whoa! You just shut the You okay?
That was Australian reporter Lauren Tomasi, struck in the leg on air while covering the LA protests that have erupted against immigration and customs enforcement raids. The stunning footage appears to show the officer aiming at Tomasi and crew, you can see him there, before firing a rubber bullet at them. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese condemned the incident Tuesday, 4 days into the riots. Here he is speaking at the National Press Club in Canberra, the capital of Australia.
That footage was horrific. That was the footage of an Australian journalist doing what journalists do at their very best. We have already raised these issues with the US administration. We don't find it.
New York Post photographer Toby Canham also hit by a rubber bullet. The Post reports police shot him in the head Sunday evening as he was filming a chaotic scene between cops and rioters. A California Highway Patrol officer suddenly turned and fired his weapon at him. Reactions poured in. Australians versus the Agenda X account didn't seem upset that the Aussie reporter took a hit, writing, quote, "This is the same journalist who celebrated when I was imprisoned for helping to organize anti-lockdown protests during COVID. I'd like to extend my personal thanks to the Los Angeles Police Department for their service." Meanwhile, Republicans against Trump denounced both incidents, posting, quote, "Stop attacking the press now. This is a disgrace."
And in the latest incident of journalists being caught in the crossfire, CNN reporter Jason Carroll and his TV crew were detained by police Tuesday night while covering the protests. Here he is describing what happened in his own words.
I was walking over to the officer, tried to explain who I was. I turned around and I had my hands behind my back. They did not put me in zip ties, but they did grab both of my hands as I was escorted over to the side. They said, "You are being detained." They took down my name. They asked me where I was from. They get your basic information. And I said, "Am I being arrested?" He said, "No, you're not being arrested. You're being detained."
So, I mean, the distinction there that the cops were purportedly drawing between being arrested and detained seems a distinction without a difference in many ways. What happened there, particularly the Australian reporter where the footage, we watched the footage of it, it seems that the person aimed at her. Now, it is, of course, possible that a wider angle would show a different thing, but it looks very much like that the guy fired a rubber bullet at her. That, to me, if that is indeed what happened, the idea that that can be done with impunity is worrisome. We read out that tweet. Well, there is the footage again, where you see the law enforcement guy on the left-hand side of the screen, circled there, seeming to take aim at her and fire. This is, I think, one of the problems of there being so much anti-media sentiment in the general bloodstream of public debate. Yes, of course, the media has failings. We have identified them here repeatedly. But the idea that if you're wearing a police uniform or riot gear, you can just take a pot shot with a rubber bullet at a reporter, I mean, that seems just terrible to me.
Yeah, reporters shouldn't be targeted. I'd be interested to know if this police officer was chastised for what he did, and I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case. I do think maybe people are making a little bit too much hay about this, as if this was as if the police writ large are targeting reporters intentionally. These are obviously very contentious situations. When we saw the camera pan around, we saw that there were a lot of other people there filming who were ostensibly not part of the press. A lot of them.
How do you know they weren't part of the press, Amber?
Well, I would assume they'd be wearing either press badges or not dressed in all black. I mean,
well, hold on, though. I mean, from what I could see, the cops were looking in another direction and then turn around and take a shot at her. So I think, while I think that we are right to be cautious in exactly what happened, I also don't think we should lunge to the other extreme and just assume that he was taking
sure, but
a shot
presumably
at
all
violence.
those people we're looking at in the back are not members of the press, right? So they could have been firing in the general direction. But look, I know a lot of people who have covered riots
That's not the general direction.
Oh, well, look at those two people right there. I think that there's, look, I know a lot of people who have covered riots over the years. Several of my friends were embroiled in the 2020 summer riots and got shot with rubber bullets. This is not ideal, right? We don't want members of the press getting shot with rubber bullets, but we're talking about a riot here. I think the idea that the police are out there trying to hunt down reporters to shoot them with rubber bullets is disingenuous, and I think not giving enough deference to people who are in a very tense situation with people throwing rocks at them, setting cars on fire. And again, this reporter should not have been shot, but I loathe to turn this into some larger trend where the police are just are targeting reporters because they don't like their coverage.
I'm not necessarily saying, whenever you say larger trend, I mean, the implication there is that I think the police writ large are going around shooting reporters. I don't think that, but I do think I don't think have the footage of the New York Post photographer also getting hit in the head with a baton round. But the footage which he himself took, which is very sinister because you can see the thing coming toward him in slow motion. I mean, that seems clearly targeted at him. I would argue that the Australian woman, it was clearly targeted at her. And just in general, and perhaps this is a philosophical difference, I think I'm just less inclined to take a generous interpretation of police actions than you are. I think that in those instances, those are obvious abuses of power. And if they are abuses of power by the individual police officer, they're still very wrong and they still need to face consequences for it.
On the CNN issue, I mean, you have this guy walking up to the police officers who are standing in riot formation. They obviously don't know who this guy is. They briefly detained him to find out who he was and then released him when they found out. So to me, that was a non-issue. But this is highly gaseous context again. These are very contentious moments for the police. They're trying to make decisions in a snap moment to try to disperse these crowds. And I don't support, obviously, the shooting of this reporter with the rubber bullet. But again, to me, this is like a small blip on the radar of what the police are dealing with over the past 6 days.
I mean, it's a police assault on a civilian.
Yeah, and I said that he should be held accountable for it. They should give him a talking to, make clear that that's not acceptable. But again, like in the larger context of everything that's happening, I just don't find this to be really like some huge story.
I think it's a criminal act rather than an element of misbehavior.
I mean, my friend was hit in the flak vest with a rubber bullet in 2020, and nobody cried for him. So I find it a bit disingenuous. That's going to do it for us on Rising Live. Look out for more exclusive YouTube content coming your way today. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hills YouTube channel so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts.